the evidence is pretty overwhelming that if you drink green tea regularly, even a single cup, but ideally 3 to 4 cups of green tea a day. And if my great uncle who lived to 104, he drank probably 6, maybe 10 cups of green tea a day. Was healthy until his very last breath.
Wow.
And it's been shown that actually drinking green tea regularly lowers the risk of colon cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, brain tumors. And so there's a lot of evidence, human evidence, that actually shows that to be true. Tomatoes have been shown to lower the risk of prostate cancer. We talked about that. And eating good phytonutrient-rich green vegetables also been shown to be protective against a whole flotilla of different types of cancers. And so one of the things I talk about in my book, and again, it's, this is like a deep dive into this, is, well, how much should you eat? How servings do you need to eat a week? Or if you eat seafood, like what type of fish and how often and how much fish should you eat a day? I'm somebody, like, because I came out of the biotech world, like it's all about the dose, right? And actually, I think one of the famous Greek philosophers basically say, the poison is in a dose. Anything that's too much or too little, it's going to be not enough or too much. And so one of the things I've tried to do over the course of the last year, frankly, during the pandemic, I spent a lot of time thinking about how do I take a lot of this information that's been bottled up that like led to me to write the book and get it out to people. So I actually created an online course and I do master classes now to really get at those sort of nuts and bolts of details of things. But so I would say follow the evidence. There are certain foods like green tea, like tree nuts, like tomatoes, like leafy greens, like seafood, and there's specific types of seafood. It's not just salmon, but even shellfish, actually, and haddock and hake, and some of these other things that consider. So again, if you only listen to the sort of the common urban mythology, you hear the same things. Eat your salmon, eat your kale, and it goes so much deeper than that. Like you prompted this a couple of times. Is it as simple as? It's never as simple as. The God is always in the details, and those details allow us freedom to choose the things that we might like. It gives us more of a repertoire to go into.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of details, I mean, we've had other researchers on the podcast, and they talk about, these really intricate details of our physiology: IGF-1, mTOR, insulin. Do those come up at all in your recommendations? Do you talk about minimizing glycemic variability with your dietary choices? Do you talk about, keeping insulin low and not spiking it with, too many, the consumption of too many carbohydrates, added sugars and things like that? Or is it more big picture for you, just, prioritizing food quality, which is what it sounds like to be?
Well, here's the thing. I'm a researcher, so I am into those details, the glycemic index, the CRPs, and all these other things that a lot of people talk about. But when I actually try to communicate to people who are really interested in changing their lives for the better, just want to optimize their health, they don't want to be told, they don't need to know all the details, right? They want to feel more empowered. And so I try to kind of up my own game by trying to simplify the details into things that people can use. Like, and if you want to have that conversation, like if one wants to have that conversation about the tomatoes and how do you cook them and what happens to the chirality of the lycopene molecule, we can get into that stuff. But look, I just told you, if you're a man and you want to lower your risk of prostate cancer, tomatoes are great. 2 to 3 servings, half a cup each time. If you cook it, it actually makes it a little bit better for you. And if you're asking me, what's the most potent tomato that I should choose from? I would say San Marzano tomatoes actually have the highest amount of lycopene. Like I like to actually message in ways that make sense to people, that are really practical. But absolutely, put me in the Olympic ring and give me an épée, and we can fence and go into all those details.
I love it. Were you a foodie before you became a scientist? Like when did those two passions for you converge?
I first of all grew up in a background. My background is Asian, but I grew up in America. I was born here, and I ate a lot of fresh home cooked foods with fresh whole plant-based foods all the time. It was a treat when I had a sloppy Joe. I mean, it was a very rare day when I had a lasagna or whatever it was. I mean, I used to covet like, those things like, oh man, my friends are having all this great stuff. But I really grew up eating mostly a plant-based whole foods diet. But I also grew up in a family and with friends who really enjoyed eating. And so when I went to college, I love to explore foods, and a lot of people don't know this, but I enjoy cooking, and if you in order to enjoy cooking, in order to cook well, you have to like to eat. And when I finished college, I did a gap year before I went to medical school, and and this is I hate to say it, it's like 1984. I took a gap year and I went to Europe, and where did I live? I lived in Italy, in Greece. Why? Specifically to study the culture and traditions of food and how they related to health. So this is a long time ago, before people were talking about the Mediterranean diet. I was living it by being there in northern Italy and in traveling all around. I went over to Greece. I even went mountain climbing because that's something that was a hobby of mine back then. And I climbed up in this area called Mount Athos, which is like the theocratic republic of Eastern Orthodoxy, to get into monasteries to study how monks who are vegetarians live their lives. And I volunteered as a chef in a monastery, and like was stirring beans with this like canoe-sized spoon in this cauldron in this monastery that like cooked everything by fire. And so, I am a foodie. And I think that, again, this intimacy is something that's very personal to me, as it is to everybody. But I love like exploration. I just think that, I would tell you, I love food. I respect food. I wouldn't say I love to eat. So I'm not somebody that shovels food down my mouth. I like to taste. I like to explore. I like to understand. And I think that that's something I like to share with people.
I really appreciate that. And I can totally relate as well. You mentioned as one of your 5 pillars, the immune system. And, we've heard a lot about inflammation. Inflammation is a feature of the immune system. It's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. Can you talk to my audience a little bit about what inflammation is and maybe the foods that can help dampen inflammation in the body? Because we know that inflammation plays such an important role in the etiology of chronic disease.
Absolutely. So first of all, if we didn't have inflammation, we probably would have died as kids, because when we cut ourselves, on a swing set or, on building blocks or, a scuffle in the schoolyard or whatever it is, that cut that you get, we fall off your bicycle, you skin your knee. What's the first thing that happens? You get a little bit of redness. It's painful. You get a little bit of redness, a little bit of swelling. That's inflammation. That's our body's natural first line of defense. And inflammation is just one part of our immune system. It's the front line, and it's designed inherently to get rid of bacteria that might enter the body if we actually are injured. So a little inflammation is really, really important. And what our body knows how to do is to ramp up the inflammation quickly, which is why when you cut yourself, you get that swelling within seconds, frankly, definitely within minutes. And then what happens over the course of a day or 2 days or 3 days, your body tones that down, turns the volume way down, and then turns it off. So inflammation is a defensive part of our immune system that our body turns on and then turns off. If you can't turn it off, you get chronic inflammation. And that's the problem that we see in chronic diseases. In diabetes, we've got chronic inflammation. In heart disease, chronic inflammation. Cancer, chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation triggers other diseases as well. It's kind of like, here's the analogy. We know that when humans made fire, we suddenly had the power to be able to warm ourselves and cook our food, okay? And we want to keep that fire in a little fire pit. And that's where fire was useful to us. And we know that, after the evening, you put the fire out, then you go out and forage or whatever it is. So turning it down at the very end. Now imagine if the fire doesn't go out. And worse, imagine the fire pops out of the fire pit and catches the forest on fire. Now you got the wildfire, right? And this is what's going on in our country right now. We got these raging wildfires going everywhere, destroying things. That's what happens. That's the inflammation we're really talking about. But I always try to point out to people, you don't want to eliminate inflammation. You want to kind of turn it way down. So what are some ways to turn down inflammation using food? again, here's the science. It turns out that there's a lot of different food substances that can turn down inflammation. Green tea will turn down inflammation. Vitamin C, simple vitamin C, which is found in so many foods, can also turn down inflammation. So red bell peppers, strawberries, guava, tomatoes, oranges, citrus, of course, are great sources of vitamin C. I just gave you a handful of things you could sprinkle over the course of the day. Now, how do we know that vitamin C does this? Again, it's not theoretical. Like, that's one of the things that I try to bring to the table is, what happens in a lab is in a lab. It's like Vegas, stays in the lab. But what happens in people? Well, that actually makes a difference. And when you find it in the lab and in people, now you got my attention. Well, so studies have been done with people with inflammatory autoimmune diseases where they've got like runaway inflammation. And there was a study in Japan looking at lupus. So in the Miyagi prefecture in Japan, there's like this lupus center where, it's like a lupus out of control. And they found that people, women mostly with lupus who had this chronic inflammation, that those women who ate more vitamin C containing foods like guava, tomatoes, strawberries, those kinds of things, bell peppers, they had high levels of vitamin C and they had lower levels of inflammation as measured by CRP, and they had less lupus flares. That's human. That's feasible. And that can be delicious as well.
Yeah. So I have to ask, have there been trials to look at supplemental vitamin C, and have they seen the same results? Because I believe that study that you just referenced, I mean, it sounded to me like an observational study, right? So have they been able to tease it out and look at supplementary vitamin C?
So here's not yet to my knowledge, and here's part of the problem. Once you get to a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial approved by an institutional review board in a hospital, and you want to get these patients with lupus, the research is now changing. But the old school way, you're going to get people with runaway, out of control lupus at the end of their game. Okay. And then they're going to also be on steroids, and they're going to be on all these monoclonal antibodies. And now you're not really studying kind of the real world anymore. You're taking the train wrecks, the worst of the worst, and trying to see if a vitamin is going to make a dent. I'm talking about people that, are living their lives normally, not in a hospital, and are just trying to get their stuff under control. Right. And so that's where these observational studies are, to your point, they're important hypothesis generation. But the hypothesis should be tested. But the hypothesis is also easily tested by people as soon as they hear about it in their home that night after they hear about it. Food has immediacy. So what I would say is that we should all be eager to conduct our own clinical studies on ourselves if we think that there's a study and good science that actually points a finger towards a direction that we can actually get behind.
Yeah. One of the most, I think, typically when people think of inflammation and supplements that are commonly talked about, they think fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids. What are your thoughts on those as a potential anti-inflammatory intervention?
The fish oil has been studied as a supplement. And, I think that a large body of evidence is that it does have good anti-inflammatory benefits. It lowers CRP. It can improve arthritis symptoms of pain and swelling and lower medication needs. And it also seems to have some improvement in dementia in clinical trials, like prospective clinical trials. And they think it's by lowering inflammation as well. So again, yet another kind of, I would say, brick to put on this wall that what we eat can make a difference. But here's what I would tell you. Like, some people love to take supplements. I know people who, that's their thing. They want to take a bunch of pills in the morning and they feel good about them. And I'm okay with that. But if you can get the same substance from a whole food and get your protein and get diversity, because our bodies are designed for diversity. We're not one trick ponies, So if you can get omega-3 fatty acids from eating salmon, anchovy, hake, sardines, manila clams, I think that's great, because you're testing your body, you're stretching your body's repertoire of responding to the things we're putting into it in ways that activate your health defenses. And that's my own personal way of actually trying to get omega-3s.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you, because you're also getting all these other, as you mentioned, protein, but even on top of that, there's all these additional nutrients that are strengthening the entirety of the system. Take salmon, for
Yeah.
example, loaded
Yeah,
with
and by the way,
astaxanthin.
here's a cool piece of research that a lot of people don't know. Sea bass, which also contains omega-3 fatty acids, have been found by researchers in Guangzhou to actually contain they think it's a peptide, but it's in the meat itself, and only recently discovered that actually speeds up wound healing. And so they're like that's a really cool idea, and that's, to me, scientists get excited by the unknown. A lot of people think that scientists spend all their time talking about all the stuff they know, the brainiacs. Actually, when you get a group of scientists together, like when I get together for dinner with my science buddies, it's not that we geek out talking about all the stuff that we know, like engineers. Like we scientists, biology scientists, actually spend a lot of time talking about what we don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah, did you know what we don't know? Like how would we answer this question? And that's what I would say is so exciting about food and health. We are really at the beginning of a new era of really being able to truly understand not only what's in our food, but how our body responds to what we put inside it. And metabolism is a whole other dimension of this that is coming down the pike as well.
Yeah, and we know it's so important, especially over the past year. Metabolism and metabolic health has really come into the spotlight as being something that we all ought to be conscious of.
Think about this aquarium that's got fish that you want to keep. These are your pets. And it's also got overgrowth of algae, like that completely overgrows the tank. And that algae is going to kill the fish, right? You get enough gunk growing in that tank, you're going to kill the fish. So what can you actually do to clean up that tank? You want to get rid of the algae, but you don't want to kill the fish. That's really probably the best analogy of this microenvironment situation in any organ that we have in our body, where you want to get rid of the cancer cells, but you don't want to actually kill the healthy cells. Well, it turns out that cancers are exquisitely sensitive to the blood vessels, as I told you, and if you cut off the blood supply to cancer, it's kind of like lowering the bubbling, the air system into the aquarium. So you got enough just for the fish, but not enough for the algae to grow. And the body knows how to make that difference. So, for example, blood vessels that are feeding normal cells are really well constructed. Think about a house that the architect really made really strong. It's got good pilings. It's got good infrastructure. The frame is really solid. The windows are really nailed down tightly. And a cancer, when it grows blood vessels to it, doesn't do it really well. So that's like a crappy contractor that cut all the corners. And so basically the house, the blood vessel system feeding the cancer is like a crappy house. When a hurricane comes, okay, guarantee you that the vessels that are feeding the cancer are going to come flying apart, but the ones that are feeding the healthy cells, the well-constructed ones, are going to stick around. They're going to outlast the storm. And that's basically what we can actually do with anti-angiogenic drugs. Now, foods can do the same thing. There are many things in foods, these bioactives we talked about, that Mother Nature laced into plants, kind of like Mother Nature's pharmacy with an F, actually can help to mow the lawn and tame those blood vessels, so that if they're growing towards the cancer, you can kind of prune them back, trim them back to normal, and it prevents the cancers from growing new ones, which is really, really important. For cancer prevention, that's just having enough of that milieu to prevent blood vessels from overgrowing can be really important. So what are some of the things? Green tea, which everybody knows has antioxidants, which can actually lower your blood sugars, help to lower your cholesterol, lower your stress levels, your catecholamine, actually is super packed with these catechins, EGCG, the main polyphenol that is anti-angiogenic. So way back when I got in this field, we had a test system where we were testing cancer drugs that could starve a cancer by cutting off its blood supply. And one of the things that I did is I actually dropped some green tea in there, and it was shocking how effective the green tea polyphenols were in stopping those blood vessels that were feeding the cancer. And in fact, if I didn't tell the technician doing the lab work that it was actually a natural compound, and I told them it came from a drug company, they would have been super excited about it and started jumping up and down. And so again, Mother Nature is really, really good. So polyphenols in tea, EGCG is one of them. Resveratrol in red wine, also another one that's actually really, really powerful in terms of being anti-angiogenic. Genistein, the phytoestrogen in soy, actually can also cut off the blood supply feeding breast cancer. So it's just the opposite of the urban legend out there that soy is not good for you. I recently saw an article. It was a cover of a magazine that said, soy anti-nutrients or something like that. And my mind was blown that somebody could actually say that, because most of the nutrients, including the proteins, but also the phytoestrogens in soy, again, if you're a scientist, you take a look at this, and the phytoestrogens look nothing like human estrogens. They're not dangerous. They actually block human estrogens, and they actually are also anti-angiogenic, and they cut off the blood supply to breast cancers. And this has been shown in human patients, breast cancer patients as well. Tomatoes have lycopene. So many of the same foods that we know are good, healthy, plant-based sources of nutrition, we're now rediscovering that many of the bioactives in them are also powerful cancer blood vessel cutting off systems that cut off the starve a tumor.
The point that I want to drive home here is that you had this quote in your original TED Talk, and you said, "As a doctor, I know that once a disease has progressed to an advanced stage, achieving a cure can be difficult, if not impossible." And the reason that you were sharing this in the context of your presentation and your TED Talk was you were helping people understand that this is one of the main drivers of why you got interested in the topic of food. This is something that we do 2-3 times a day. And if that food could have just as similar of an impact, in some cases, even more so, then it's not what's better, food or medicine. They're both great, but food is something that we all have control over. And because of education gaps in healthcare practitioners, again, well-meaning, they may not have the education in food. This is something where we're empowered as consumers to start making a difference and a dent, because as most of us know, there's this area that's in between, you don't have cancer and you're diagnosed with cancer, right? It's not like one day you just show up at the doctor's office and then cancer came out of nowhere. It's growing always sort of in the background, at least the conditions are, until one day something changes and then it has that explosive growth. So if we can make a difference now, then we're more empowered to actually change our health and hopefully minimize or potentially even avoid some of these chronic diseases later down the path.
Absolutely. I mean, my how I got into nutrition, molecular nutrition, was that taking care of patients who were terribly sick is incredibly rewarding, and giving them an answer to why they're not feeling well and helping them trying to get solutions for that is such an important privilege to be trained and to be able to actually do. But when I started to see, I'll tell you an interesting story. So I was a doc at a veterans hospital, loved taking care of veterans. Most of my patients were in their 50s and 60s and 70s and older, and many of them were overweight, if not morbidly obese. They had bad heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, cancer, the bone diseases. I mean, you name it. There were all the problems that you would see in an older person. But the thing that really struck me as I was writing prescriptions and sending people to specialists was the juxtaposition of these individuals who, in their second half of their lives, 60s and 70s, terribly out of shape, riddled with disease, and I was trying to help them. But I also looked at these people and realized that, if I put on my spectacles of the time machine, the same individual going back when they were 20 years old was cut, fit, buff as a soldier. In fact, they couldn't even serve in the military unless they were in perfect shape, right? And so what happened to these people over the course of their decades, over the course of their lives, is they've lost control of their health. And that's what made me realize treating the horse out of the barn is something worthy of doing. But why do we want to wait for that? Why don't we actually prevent disease in the first place? And when I was thinking about prevention, you really can't think about drugs. I mean, because drugs are expensive, they got side effects, really difficult to develop a preventative drug, and who would want that anyway? But food naturally lends itself to prevention, because that is indeed the intervention that we take multiple times a day. And in fact, our food is the intervention, is the health care that we do for ourselves between visits to the doctor's office. I mean, we've come to regard healthcare as what we do when we, make an appointment and step into the door and get weighed by the nurse before we sit on that, that cold paper-filled exam table. But in fact, most of the healthcare we're doing is between the time we go see the doctor.
It's so true. And if we're fully going to understand the impact that food can have, to going back to that analogy you had, why is it that this cut, healthy, ripped soldier at the age of 20, and then you contrast them, fast forward a few years, 40 years, they're 60 years old, and their systems are starting to fail. Their angiogenesis in some cases is out of control. In some cases, it's under producing where it needs to be. What happened in the interim? And in your book, you really highlight that in addition to angiogenesis, there's with angiogenesis, there's 5 areas. There's 5 sort of key areas that we have to look at these sort of systems in the body to understand what happens when we go from being healthy to being in a place of disease. But let's walk through them, starting off with you can pick which one you want to start off with next, and we'll give a little bit of an overview, just like we did with angiogenesis.
Yeah, sure, Drew. I mean, this is such a great question. I'll tell you how I got into it, because I think that's the best way to articulate this for your viewers. As a doctor, I was always trained to wonder why somebody got sick. What did they do? What was going on in their bodies that led to an illness? And in fact, most patients always ask me, well, so what happened? How did I get this? How did I contract this condition? And that's how I was trained to think for decades. But reality is, and as a researcher, that's what I was looking at, is what is the underlying cause of illness? But I think I discovered there was a much more interesting question. And that more interesting question is, why don't we get sick more often? If you think about it, like, kids are usually pretty healthy. And actually, when you're in the prime of your life, you're generally pretty healthy. Yeah, you might get a flu or might get a cold every now and then. It's only when you get older that you start getting sick. And the more interesting question is, like, why don't kids get cancer more often than they do? Why don't healthy adults get more heart disease? Why don't they get diabetes, more often than they do? I mean, some people do at a younger age. And so that's really, by turning that question about why did I get sick into why aren't I getting sick more often, that led me down this direct path to saying, what is a body doing to prevent illness? And what is health itself? If the question, the way that I would use to answer the question, what is health, is like, yeah, well, you're healthy if you're not sick. And I think that's how most people would answer it. Turns out, health is not just the absence of disease. Health is the result of our body firing on all cylinders to keep us that way and to ward off illness. And what keeps us healthy, what wards off illness, what is firing on all cylinders, are health defense systems. Now, I found 5 health defense systems, and I wrote about 5 in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, because I've worked in the drug development field in each of these areas. Angiogenesis is one of them. Let's talk about all 5 of them first. Blood vessels, I've done drug development in helping to grow blood vessels and stop blood vessels. Second are stem cells. I'll come back to that. I've done decades of work in developing regenerative medicine to try to regenerate organs. It's amazing what you can actually do in the biotech world with that. Third is the microbiome. I've done research on the microbiome with colleagues at MIT and elsewhere. Fourth is genes, our DNA. And most people think of our DNA as sort of the genetic code. I've done gene therapy. So I've actually helped to develop gene therapies. And fifth is our immune system. And our immune system, which is hardwired, and this is more important than ever before, in immunotherapy for cancer, for example, is one of the most powerful breakthroughs in the medical world today. So I've got the street cred of doing drug development in each of these areas. But rather than thinking about using drugs to activate these systems, if we turn the sock inside out and take a look at, okay, so how do these systems actually defend our health? Our circulation prevents disease by feeding our healthy cells and preventing bad diseases from growing, like cancer. Our stem cells By the way, you may not know this, but all of us have about 75 million stem cells that are in our bodies at any given time. And we're actually made out of stem cells because when we were in our mom's wombs, the only reason our bodies were able to even form a human figure, like, the little Play-Doh that kind of forms humans in the womb, is because of stem cells. And we retain some of those after we're born, and we lock them up in our bone marrow and in our skin and elsewhere, and our bodies regenerate continuously. That's one of our health defense systems, because as we age, we need to repair ourselves from the inside out. Like, we know our hair regrows for most people. We know that even our gut, our mucous membranes, our the sort of skin in our mouth will regrow. Anybody who's ever had a really hot a hot piece of food and you burn your mouth, and it totally screws you up. Next day you're back to normal because your skin in your mouth, your mucous membrane regenerated. Okay, that's like eating a Dorito and you scrape the top of your mouth. Next day you'll be fine because of regeneration. But what's amazing is that our organs regenerate from the inside out. If I took your liver and we cut off 2/3 of your liver and left 1/3 left, it would regenerate the rest of the 2/3. So just like a starfish would regenerate an arm. Of your lung, if I cut off the tip of your lung, it would grow right back. And what we're starting to realize is that the playbook of human biology is being rewritten, because when you and I were kids, I'm sure our grade school teachers taught us the same thing. Starfish and salamanders regenerate, but people don't. Wrong. People regenerate. And so now we can actually try to coax this regeneration to go faster. It's one of our defense systems, but and while biotech people are trying to figure out ways to make us regenerate, foods can also cause us to prompt regeneration as well, which is really cool. Foods like chocolate, foods like dark cacao, like dark chocolate, cacao, polyphenols can actually stimulate regeneration. There's all kinds of other biotech kind of things that can actually do this, but Mother Nature has laced things that can be regenerative, like ursolic acid in fruit peel can coax our stem cells to come out of our bone marrows to stimulate regeneration as well. I mean, imagine a future in which we understood how to match the substance in a food that naturally occurs with something that we need, like brain regeneration for dementia, for example. That would really be a game changer. And so that's where the future of understanding our body's hardwired self-defenses for regeneration goes. Microbiome, we've got like 39 trillion bacteria in our body, most of them in our colon. And we know that when our gut bacteria is healthy, it controls our hormones, it controls our cholesterol metabolism, it controls how our body uses blood sugars. When we screw up our gut bacteria, it screws up everything. Like, literally, we've got an ecosystem inside our body that if we don't take care of that ecosystem, it wrecks the rest of our body. And something that's stunning to know, for example, is that is how vulnerable the system is. Artificial sweeteners, like you find in a diet soda, can, in 24 hours, overnight, start to destroy your gut microbiome. The healthy gut bacteria start to change. They don't like that artificial sweetener because we don't absorb those calories, right? Those are the non-caloric sweeteners. So we get the taste in the front end. In the back end, we don't absorb it, so we don't get the calories. But guess what? Our bacteria are eating those things too, and they don't like it. We're poisoning the field. When those bacteria don't like it and they start dying, it affects our metabolism. It affects even our brain hormones. So we want to keep our gut defense system, which is tied to our immune system, by the way, really, really healthy. Our DNA is another defense system. People don't realize this, but we make 10,000 mistakes in our DNA every single day that causes mutations, which then can cause cancer. So fortunately, our DNA system defends us by fixing itself. And our immune system, of course, is our ultimate shield to prevent us from bad guys coming in from the outside, whether it's COVID or whether it's the flu or whether it's some other germ. But also our immune system protects us from bad guys on the inside of our body. And that's those cancers that we started talking about our immune system conducts surveillance to take out those bad guys inside our skin as well.
I know you're a big fan of olive oil. I want to talk about olive oil and why it's so beneficial. But before we get to olive oil, in the spirit of the kind of foods that we should think about limiting when we are in our supermarket or our grocery store and we're looking around to purchase oils to cook food in, to sprinkle on food, to pour on our salads, what kind of oils should we try and avoid? And then what sort of oils should we try and buy instead?
So this, like the debate about artificial sweeteners, is a loaded topic. And so I want to just start, this component of our conversation by saying the jury is still very much deliberating what oils are harmful to you and are most harmful to you. But I think that it's less controversial what oils are better for you and good for you. I want to, for your listeners, I want to kind of give people some real practical things and not just kind of dive into the science of petroleum products, which is what oils are. Let's talk about this. Rule number one, regardless of what oil you actually have, what I would say is don't have too much of it, because oils are fats and fats can be healthier, but there really isn't such a thing as a healthy fat that you should drink lots of it every single day. Okay. So the point is that there are healthier oils, but we should all limit the amount of oil that we actually intake into our body. All right. Number one. Number two is that, and this is actually broadly speaking, is don't reuse your oil. Okay. Most oils that are reused, when we heat them to cook, whether we're actually, again, deep frying is generally something that's not very healthy. The process of deep frying actually changes the natural chemicals that make up oil in the oil itself, and then paint it onto the food, stick it onto the food. So we're eating some of the changed chemicals when we actually eat deep fried food. Now, look, I've had some awesome fish and chips when I visited England before. And again, as we talked about, every now and then, if you spend most of your time shoring up your health defenses, raising your own bar, having a rare treat is totally fine. But when you fry things in hot oil, you're also changing the chemical structure of things. That entire browning, golden browning, crisping of food actually changes the chemical structure of the food itself, and in ways that are potentially carcinogenic. And so just need to be careful about that. The third, so I think, reusing oil, here's the thing that's kind of like a little risky. You go to a restaurant to eat, you have no idea if they're reusing your oil over and over and over again. Think about in Asian restaurants, whether it's an Indian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant, they've got these gigantic vats where they're frying tasty little bits up, but they may be reusing that oil for days. So reused oil, not good for you, for sure. And the stuff that's fried in oil can also change in time. So let's start now talking about just like the properties of oils themselves. This is where I think, rather than kind of walk into the quicksand of trying to say, is palm oil better than corn oil? Is coconut oil dangerous for you? We can wade into that jungle with, but I think you need a machete to cut your way out of it. And so the best way to think about it, to give clarity, is, are there any healthier oils to use and how to use them? And this is where I think olive oil really stands out. Number one, it's part of a healthy pattern of eating that's been revered for thousands of years. And that's in the traditional Mediterranean diet. And the olives are seasonal, they're pressed. The extra virgin olive oil contains not just fat, and monounsaturated fatty acids, which are better for your body and less damaging for your cardiovascular health. But there's a lot of polyphenols that come from the olive itself. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, but when you look at olive oil, the reason we say extra virgin olive oil, EVOO, that's what supermarkets and what restaurants are proud to use now, is because it's not just fat. It contains the polyphenols from the oil. So if you were to actually, by the way, this is a good experiment to do for your listeners, buy a little container of olives from your grocery store, de-pit it, make it easy for yourself. And literally, take it home and take a heavy glass, or take a board, like a heavy cutting board, and press those olives yourself. And you'll actually see, if you press hard enough, you'll see some oil come out of it. Now, in an olive oil factory, I mean, that's so you can actually appreciate where your food comes from, where your olive oil comes from. Now, when you actually press it, you'll see that you've crushed the olives. And some of the bits from the olives are actually in the olive oil. The reason that olive oil tastes so good, it's got that, kind of peppery, vegetal kind of quality to it. It's got an umami flavor. It's not because the fat is flavorful. It's because the bits of olives that were crushed in there are actually in there flavoring it. Now, those bits and the stuff that comes from the meat of the olives contain the polyphenols, one of which is hydroxytyrosol. Hydroxytyrosol sounds like a very complicated chemical name. Your listeners don't need to memorize it by any means, but you should know that that comes from the olive. Now, olive oil will have some of it, only about 20% of it. But if you actually press that olive, 80% goes into the olive water, and it's stuck in the pulp. And so one of the things that I always say is that, if you really love olive oil and you want to get the most out of it, just eat the whole olive, and you can actually cut up an olive and you'll get a little bit of fat, you'll get all that flavor, and you'll get a lot more of the polyphenol. Now, if you're going to cook with olive oil, I always say go for extra virgin because of that reason. I would say don't deep fry, but you can put some on to food. You can actually saute with it, not too much. All the studies show that about 3 tablespoons of olive oil, sort of like that's around the max of what you'd want a day. So nobody's drinking olive oil. And then the other thing that is, if you want to choose which olive oil, because I get overwhelmed when I walk into a store and I see all these, like a whole wall full of olive oils, right? Everybody's marketing. Here's what I do again. I pick up the olive and oil and I look at the ingredients. What do I look for? I look for monovarietal olive oil. Monovarietal means it's made with just one kind of olive. And I look for the one kind of olive that oil is made from 3 different varieties of olive. In Spain, Spanish olive oil, I look for Picual, Picual. Picual olives, among the highest in polyphenols in the oil. So the olive oil will be loaded. Second, Greek olive oil, the Koroneiki olive, which is from the Peloponnesus. Both the Picual and Koroneiki are very common olives, so that's a good news. It's not very expensive. Highest amount of one of the top 3 polyphenols. And the third, for Italian olive oil, I look for oil that's been pressed from a monovarietal called Moraiolo. And that comes from Umbria. And that's less common, harder to find, a little pricier. But I just gave you 3 olives, Picual, Koroneiki, Moraiolo, that are not, most of them are not good eating olives, but they're great for olive oil. They're packed with polyphenols. If you get olive oil that is monovarietal, pressed only from each of those, you can be guaranteed that you're getting sort of the capo de capo of the polyphenols in the olive oil.
Yeah, I love that. I actually, in my kitchen, as we speak now, is the Picual olive. It's, I would have called it a single origin, but that's because I'm probably used to picking coffee. But as you were describing that, there was such a wonderful energy in your voice and your body language. It reminded me of like a wine connoisseur talking about the different varieties of wines, or a coffee connoisseur talking about that, I get the single origin bean from this particular farm. But I guess it's not that different, is it? It's about going back to, where does this come from? How was it processed? What is actually in my hand right now that I'm about to buy?
Yeah, and there is great pride that we as humans have always had, and it's still within us, to know something about the food that is around us. I mean, if you talk to a farmer, they are proud of what they have. If you talk to a villager, they're really proud of what what grows around their community. And again, I think that, something that maybe that we're fighting against, because I want to draw back the jargon that you raised at the beginning that I think is helpful to think about. What are we really fighting against? I think we're fighting against our distraction from ourselves, getting to know who we are, getting to know, slowing down so we can actually understand our own pace. We're getting distracted by the pace of what we're expected to do, and so we've got no time for ourselves, right? I mean, every young working parent certainly feels that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, I'm so busy, I don't have time for myself. And yet, when it comes to food and health, we all need to have that time for ourselves. And I think we should take great pride in saying what it is that we actually love.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about the health properties of vegetables. Of course, you promote all kinds of vegetables which have different impacts on the body. But some of the time we're told to sprinkle or pour some olive oil onto the vegetables because it helps us absorb nutrients from them. What's your perspective on that in view of what you've just said about oil and, perhaps not over consuming it, even though it can be healthy?
Yeah, well, let's unpack that, because there's two things that you were describing. One is that in plants, let's take a tomato as a great example. There are natural substances, natural chemicals, like lycopene. Lycopene is a carotenoid. It helps to make the tomato red. It has lots and lots of healthful properties. It's a powerful antioxidant. I've studied lycopene in a laboratory, and it actually can help starve cancers by cutting off the blood supply. It can slow the shortening of telomeres to slow cellular aging, and it can actually protect our DNA from even sunlight and ultraviolet exposure. Lots of good things about it. Now, lycopene actually is naturally occurs in a tomato on a vine in a chemical form that our body doesn't absorb that well. So if you pick a tomato off the vine and you cut it up and you throw it into a salad, it might taste great. It's got some vitamin C in it. It's a great source of hydration and great flavors. Okay, especially if it's like a homegrown heirloom type of tomato. But you're not going to get as much lycopene. You're probably only going to get maybe 20% of the lycopene that's in there. But you want to, like for me, I want to get as much of the good stuff as I can. So here's what research has found. If you wanted to convert that chemical structure of lycopene into a form that you can absorb better, your body can avidly absorb, what you want to do is you want to heat the tomato like in a pan, and with the heat will change the chemical structure from a form your body doesn't absorb that well into a form that your body avidly absorbs, loves to absorb it. Now you go from 20% absorption to 80% absorption. You flipped it around completely, upended that equation completely. Now you're really absorbing it. Now, here's one additional thing though. How would you heat a tomato in a pan? You heat it in water or nothing? No, not really. You put a little bit of olive oil in it. And why is that? And it's because lycopene is a substance that we call fat soluble. It's a lipid. It loves to dissolve into fats. So a little bit of olive oil in tomatoes on a pan, sauteed, so it's soft, change the chemical structure. Flavors are really great now. And you have that. Now when you eat that tomato sauce sauteed in olive oil, the olive oil with the lycopene is carried into your body even more efficiently than if it were cooked in water. And so again, that's just one example of thousands of how oils with fat soluble foods. By the way, if you didn't want to look at olive oil, here's another common snack in the United States anyways, kind of tearing a page book from Latin American cuisine. You have these tortilla chips, and then you wind up actually having a salsa and guacamole. The salsa is often sort of stewed down tomatoes, cooked down tomatoes, served room temperature or chilled. And then the guacamole is just avocado that's been smashed up. Now, avocado has a lot of healthy fats in it. It's a fat soluble veggie. It's actually quite nutritious. Remarkably, people eating avocado actually shrink their waistline because actually, even though you're eating fat, it actually it burns down harmful fat. It's a whole other story that we had. But if you have guacamole, avocado with tomatoes, you get more lycopene. And so that happens to be kind of a popular snack in the United States.
Yeah, I love that. So the right combination of foods can actually help absorb the nutrients. I think black pepper also can do that, right? With certain nutrients?
Well, right. So black pepper, so this is an interesting thing. Most of us have heard that turmeric, which is a kind of a root, when you cut it open, it's this bright, beautiful, bright orange, a lovely color. And turmeric is also a dried spice used in Southeast Asian cuisine, including Indian cuisine, is where I first became acquainted with it. It not only makes food beautiful, it actually makes food delicious. It's got quite a lovely taste to it. It's a spice. Inside turmeric is curcumin. Curcumin is one of those natural chemicals, kind of like lycopene. It's one of those Mother Nature's treasure chest, Mother Nature's pharmacy with an F, not a PH. And the curcumin has a lot of properties: anti-inflammatory, it's antioxidant, it cuts off the blood supply, feeding cancers. It actually is helpful for your stem cells as well. It really activates almost all of your body's health defenses, and it's good for your gut microbiome. So why not just, enjoy turmeric as a spice by itself? Because it's so potent that our body actually doesn't absorb everything that it could. In fact, our body kind of gets, a lot of it gets flushed out, at the tail end. And so what we want to do to improve our body's extraction of the good stuff, the turmeric, it turns out that if you have fresh cracked black pepper, all right, there's a substance in fresh cracked black pepper called piperine. Yeah. Piperine is one of Mother Nature's, again, these remarkable chemicals that actually influences the body. And piperine helps the body hang on to the curcumin. So if you have fresh cracked black pepper with your turmeric, you're actually creating a 1-2 punch that allows you to absorb more of the curcumin.
Sleep in cooler temperatures helps to activate your brown fat when you're sleeping.
Amazing. Yeah, I sleep with one of these mattress pads that cools my mattress. Mm-hmm. It not only improves my sleep quality, but that's cool to know that it's probably encouraging the proliferation of this helpful fat.
And it also helps you sleep better, builds your immunity. There's all kinds of new things that we're beginning to realize, that cooler temperatures when we're sleeping, which probably mimics sort of the natural state of the outdoors at night. The temperatures drop.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's only in a house with a thermostat we crank up to have sort of warmer temperatures at night.
Yeah. Do you have is there like a specific temperature that we should aim for when setting our thermostats at night?
People talk about this kind of a range. It's probably between 65, 67 degrees. It's sort of under 70. It's not freezing. Like you don't want to be shivering at night.
Right.
All right. But it's sort of in the high 60s.
Okay. So make sure that you're sleeping in a cool environment. But what are these foods?
Okay. The thing that I found so amazing that I write about in my book is that foods will actually click on your brown fat to burn down harmful white fat. It'll elevate your metabolism. It'll also help you lose weight, and it'll shrink your waistline by shrinking visceral fat, that harmful gut fat. All right. So before I talk about the exact foods, I want to kind of just give a little more depth to understanding how the healthy parts of fat that we've just been talking about, because we've just spent a little time talking about healthy aspects of fat. Don't fear your fat. You don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to cut it out, burn it out. Like you want your fat.
Yeah.
And by the way, you don't want to poison your fat either.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, like people are developing, as you know, like in the news, are talking about it all the time, ways to block obesity, and and can we actually target fat and get rid of fat that way? We have to be really careful. You don't want to interfere with these normal healthy functions of fat, the fat that the baby has, the fat that we normally have to operate our organs. So let me explain basically a little bit about metabolism, fat, and then food. And then we can talk about which foods actually will really be helpful for ramping up your benefit.
Great.
So think of your car, think of your body as a car, right? So what is metabolism? Metabolism in your body is basically like the way that your car transfers fuel to run its engine. You want to get from point A to point B, you're going to drive your car. The engine needs fuel, needs gasoline. And so you're driving your car and you're paying attention to the fuel gauge. When the fuel gauge looks like it's heading to empty, what do? You pull over your car, go to a filling station, take out the gas pump, put the nozzle into the gas tank, fill it up, all right? And then when the gas tank is full, the nozzle goes click, no more gas, put it back and you drive off with a full tank, right? Now in our body requires, it's basically an engine. Our metabolism gives our body engine, all the fuel it needs. The fuel that we get in our body isn't gasoline. The fuel that we have comes from our food. Now, people have used the term calories to describe that energy unit, but I don't want people to get focused on the calories, because people tend to get too fixated on how many calories, counting calories, calories in, calories out. I want to explain something to you in a maybe easier to understand way. Food that we eat is our fuel. when we eat our food, our body senses fuel is loading up, just like we're at a filling station. So what happens is that our insulin levels go up because we are having food in our body. Insulin is that wonderful hormone produced by our pancreas that draws in the energy from the food that we just ate into our cells. So just to power up our cells, we need to have enough energy. Anything extra gets put away into the fuel tanks, which you remember in the womb, our fuel tanks were our fat cells. Little tiny fat cells that ring around the blood vessels. They actually get filled up. You can stretch a fat cell hundreds of times.
Wow.
Okay. But if you put in a little extra fuel, it's just there. You're loading up your fuel tanks. When you're not eating, your insulin levels go down. And then your body says, okay, now we can switch over to fuel burning mode. It's kind of like when you pull over to fill up your car, fill up your gas tank, you turn off your engine, you're not burning any fuel, right? So when you're done fueling up, you can turn on the engine and go drive and start burning the fuel again.
Right.
Body's done the same way. All right. So now, when we're done eating, insulin levels go down, our metabolism switches into fuel burning mode. Makes perfect sense. Where does it get the fuel? It gets the fuel from blood, anything in the cells. And then when it needs to, it taps into the fat. All right. Now, then you're driving off. And then what happens is when your fuel runs low, our brain senses that gas tank says is low. What do? We don't pull over to a gas station. We pull over to the dinner table, to the restaurant, to the refrigerator, to the pantry. All right. So you can kind of see this is a very, very common sense way of understanding our metabolism, which can be very complex if you talk to a scientist. I'm trying to boil it down to something easy. Now, here is something interesting. Remember I told you when you're not eating, you're able to burn energy. And that energy is stored in fat cells, which can get bigger and bigger and bigger when you actually eat more and more fuel. All right. So when you're not eating, like sleeping, we talked about sleep, you're actually burning fuel. So sleeping is a fuel burning state. Our metabolism is naturally switching into fuel burning because insulin is low, we're not eating, and we're actually burning. And basically what happens when we get up in the morning, okay, it's burning all night. In the morning we get up, we eat breakfast, we break our fast. All right. So when we're sleeping, we're fasting. And this is basically where the idea of intermittent fasting comes from. It's just describing what we normally do.
Yeah.
And it's not just a trend or a fad or, some crazy new kick that people should get on. It's actually very, very natural to our body. The longer we give our body time to burn without food, to be able to tap in, to do fat burning, energy sucking, shrink those fat cells, the more weight we're going to lose, the more fat we're going to burn, the more fit we're actually going to be, and the more our metabolism is actually going to rise. So basically, I want to kind of give you an example of how this might work in real life. Let's say you go to bed at 11 o'clock and you sleep for 8 hours, so you get up at 7. Okay, that's pretty typical for many people. Let's say that you eat dinner, so you have 8 hours during that sleeping time. Let's say that you eat dinner at 7 o'clock and you finish at 8. Put your dishes away at 8 o'clock. Now, no midnight snack, no dessert later on, no noshing, munching on chips or whatever sweets. But at 8, you're done. And then you actually just go about your way and you go to sleep at 11. You've gained 3 extra hours to your 8 hours. Now you've got 11 hours of fat burning. All right. That's to your advantage.
Yeah.
Your body, your metabolism is burning. Now let's say you get up at 7. All right. 8 hours of sleep. And now rather than actually get up and do what your mommy told you to do, like we were all conditioned this way, get up, eat breakfast, hurry up, catch the school bus and get off to school. All right. Let's say you get up and you take a shower, you get dressed, you putter around a little bit, check your emails or do whatever to scroll through the news. Wait an hour. Okay, before you eat breakfast, before you break your fast, now you've gained an extra hour to have your body burn fat. So now that's 1 hour in the morning, 8 hours in the evening, 3 hours the night before. Okay, that's 12 hours. So you've taken half the day to up your metabolism by burning body fat. That's an easy way to think about intermittent fasting in a completely different way. It's not 16 and 8, 16 fasting, 8 hours eating. That's pretty intense if you want to squeeze all your eating in 8 hours.
Yeah.
All right. You might not be enjoying your food and might be able to socialize the same way. And there is something to 16 and 8 that's been studied in animals and a lab. It's also been studied in humans. But I wanted to share with you that 12 and 12 hours of fasting, not eating, just like I just described, compared to 12 hours of eating also helps you burn fat and also helps you lose weight. It works as well. So you don't have to be an extremist to, put the pedal to the metal to really, really go hard at fasting. Just ordinary kind of patterns will do that. Now, this is a setup for the food, by the way. So I just told you that the way you eat, the timing of the way how you eat, actually can be very, very useful for fat burning. I also told you, by the way, this overload of gasoline, which I want to talk about in a second, is important. So how much you eat also makes a difference normally.
Yeah.
Before we get to the what. All right. So imagine you're filling your car with gas again. You're back at the filling station with your car. You get your nozzle in, the gas tank fills up. Imagine if you didn't have the click on the nozzle,
right?
And the gas keeps on flowing out. What's going to happen? The gas goes up, it fills, it runs out of the tank, down the side of the car, around the wheels, pools around your feet. Now you are standing.
It's fire hazard.
Is hazardous, flammable, dangerous mess because you've overloaded your fuel.
Yeah.
Let's go over to the body. You're eating. Now, our body doesn't have the clicker on the nozzle when we sit down to eat. There's no automatic cutoff switch. So it's easy to overeat. All right. The more you eat, the more you eat, the more you eat. Now what's happening is that your insulin's up. It's using the fuel. Everything extra gets stuffed into fat. Now those fat cells, remember I told you, can actually expand massively. Yeah. If you really overeat, you're going to stuff more fuel into the fat cells. There's a limit to how big they can get. All right. So, but you still have more extra fuel, extra food, it's going to make more fat cells.
Wow.
Okay. Those get stuffed. Okay. Then they go up. Still not enough storage? Make more fat cells. Now you kind of see how overeating creates more and more and more and more fat.
Yeah. That's the difference between fat cell hypertrophy and hyperplasia, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
So hypertrophy is actually the small fat cell getting stuffed and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Hyperplasia is actually when actually more of it actually starts to grow. And by the way, those ideas of hyperplasia, hypertrophy is like what happens in muscle too. It gets bigger.
Yeah.
Hyperplasia is actually a kind of a pre-tumorous state. It's like we use hyperplasia to describe pre-cancers.
Wow.
Cells are growing. That should they be growing? They get bigger and bigger and bigger. And let me just tell you, when fat cells are just being stuffed with fuel because you've overeaten, you actually need more fat cells. So your body makes more and more and more, and they all get bigger and bigger. When fat starts to get into an expanding mass, fat as an organ, just like any other organ, needs a blood supply. So when it outgrows its blood supply, it desperately seeks to grow new blood vessels to it. This is an area I study called angiogenesis. Fat needs to be fed. It needs oxygen and it needs nutrients. But if fat is so continuously overloaded, the center of the mass will start to die. It doesn't have enough oxygen.
Ooh.
That's called hypoxia. Hypoxia causes inflammation. And when you have inflamed fat, remember, you're standing in that pool of flammable hazard, okay? Now you're actually got, the hazard is actually inside your body. It's not around your feet.
Wow.
All right? That growing fat has this flammable inflammation hazard. And that inflammation in that fat basically wrecks, destroys the normal function of the hormones in your body. It wrecks your fat's ability to produce leptin. Now you don't know if you're hungry or not hungry. Maybe you're too hungry. Or maybe you're not hungry. It can't tell. And it destroys adiponectin. So even though you're eating, there's plenty of energy. You know what? Maybe you're not absorbing that energy very well. Now your blood sugars start to rise. And then resistant, it doesn't even know what to do anymore. When do you put on the brakes? And you can kind of see how overeating by itself, okay, and we're going to get to the quality of the fuel in a second, but overeating in itself can easily, your body just tries to stuff away the fuel, but can easily tip things over the edge. And that tipping point actually is where good fat gets deranged and turns into bad fat.
Wow. What a story. And is this the point at which the free fatty acids begin spilling over and getting stored in quote unquote non-professional storage sites in the body, like organs where you're not supposed to accumulate fat?
Like your liver.
Yeah.
Right? So you've heard about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Very common today.
Which very common, and it's actually tracks along with the obesity pandemic that's going on around the world. And basically what happens is that you make more fat, it expands. Now, remember I told you your body's stuffing that fuel using the fuel tanks, all right? But at some point, you've got so much fuel, all your tanks are full, and now the fuel is leaking out of the tank. And when it leaks out of the tank, it's got to go somewhere. And certain organs start to absorb more of it, like your liver. So when your liver starts to collect fat, you are starting to be in trouble because your liver is a filtration system, the cleanser of your body, detoxifier of your body. Now you start to plug that organ up, you can't detoxify your blood very easily. So you can kind of see, by the way, it's starting to make sense now, right? Like how the simple behavior of overeating or not being mindful of the timing in which you're eating, so you're not giving your body enough chance to burn down that extra fuel, can have unintended and very deadly consequences.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where the science of the metabolism actually comes into play. So before we get to what kind of fuel should we be eating, let's say, very simply put, the more time you can give your body to burn down extra fuel, the better your health is going to be. Meaning, if you finish dinner, don't eat anything afterwards as long as you can. Like, I mean, just don't eat after dinner. Put the dishes away and don't eat. No more food.
Yeah.
All right. Then you go to bedtime, then take advantage of the whole evening, and then don't eat breakfast right away. In fact, if you occasionally skip a breakfast, it's even better because now you're giving your body extra fat burning, energy burning time. All right. So rather than kind of like become like really rigid about intermittent fasting, I think if you have this self-awareness that your body is naturally doing this is actually a pretty easy way to actually start to leverage your body on your own behalf.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, at the very least, at the end of the day, you're skimming off a ton of calories that generally are not the best for you, right? Like the foods that people tend to eat when curling up in front of the TV to binge watch their favorite show, those tend to be not the most nutritious calories anyway, right?
That's right. And actually, so that then gets to the quality of the food that you're eating, right? So think about it. Let's go back to the car because I think it's something that everyone can understand. You know that if you buy a brand new car, they always tell you to put the highest quality of gas you can in your tank. Look, in the beginning, if you actually put crappy gas in your tank, your engine's going to be running just fine. It can take it a while, but every day you actually put poor quality fuel in your car, your engine is going to suffer. Guarantee you over the long run, it's not going to run as well as somebody who takes care of their car by putting a higher quality of gas. So for food, it's the same thing. Our body, remember, our metabolism is really just kind of like an engine running the engine. So the food that we eat, which is our fuel, really is like the quality of our fuel. You put good quality fuel into your body, your engine's going to run longer. Okay, that's longer, healthier, more vibrant living. Okay, you put poor quality food in your body. Look, once in a while, you're going to eat something that's not so good for you, no problem. If you're generally healthy, you'll rebound. We're highly resilient. But what we're talking about are the people that snack, drink junk, harmful foods, and pay very little attention to quality food.
Mother Nature, in creating foods, have laced these foods with natural chemicals, right? These are called bioactives, and they're called bioactives because they're biologically active. And in a plant, let's look at a strawberry, for example. Okay, the tartness of strawberries, there's strawberries are sweet and tart. The tartness comes from an acid, unsurprisingly, called ellagic acid. Okay, and so when a strawberry is a little tartar because it's got more ellagic acid. So ellagic acid is a powerful starver of cancer. So it cuts off the blood
supply. Does that actually end up in our bloodstream? Like, could I eat strawberries and then you could draw my blood and be like, you had 7 strawberries?
Absolutely.
That is insane.
Okay. Now, but here's the even more insane part. What are these bioactives doing in the plant? They are part of the plant's health defense system. So these natural chemicals help the plant defend themselves. When we eat them, they have another job description. They do double duty, and they actually help to activate our own body's self defenses. Now, here's one thing that I think is a practical value. For a long time, people are sort of talking about like, well, like you should eat more organic and don't need pesticides and stuff like that. here's a whole new take on this. Okay. And this is kind of smoking hot information. Pesticides actually kill insects so that the plants look better. The leaves aren't as chewed up, and usually the fruits or vegetables look a little bit better too, right? That's just agriculture. It makes it look better and the product look better on the shelf. Organic doesn't use that. And so a lot of times you have the more natural, the bugs are nipping at the leaves and chewing at the stems. Guess what? Mother Nature created things like ellagic acid as natural insecticides. And so basically when the strawberry plant is being chewed on, it makes more ellagic acid to repel the bugs. It's a wound healing response and a defensive response. So organic foods have more bioactives as a reaction. I just was involved with a study I was meeting about yesterday talking about coffee. Organic versus conventionally grown coffee. Conventional grown coffee with pesticides. Organic coffee, hands down, this is a study at the Warsaw University, hands down, a pound for pound of coffee bean, organic coffee has more bioactives than the pesticide treated coffee because the insects, the natural things in the environment, cause it to create more natural health defenses.
Dude, this gets incredible. I can't believe I'm this deep in my journey of health and all that. And I never realized that the actual chemical compounds from food, I always thought it was the metabolites from the digestive process that was making its way into the bloodstream, which I know also happens.
Also happens.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. So one thing we actually haven't talked a lot about, which is your specialty, is angiogenesis. So when we eat something that has an anti-angiogenesis benefit, is it like ubiquitous across every blood vessel in the body, or is it doing something, creating some sort of knock-on effect like the antibody drip that we're getting, where it's somehow selectively targeting things that are overproducing something?
Great question. Let me kind of frame it in first framing about angiogenesis in general. So when we were in our mom's wombs, okay, and sperm met egg and started to form a little ball of cells that didn't look anything like a person yet, that started to create little organs and start to create shape. The first organs that get created are blood vessels. Our circulation is the first thing that gets created. So our blood supply, our circulation is very much a part of who we are. And I mentioned that we have 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels. Just to give you a sense of how extraordinarily big that is, if you were to pull out all the blood vessels from you or me and line them up end to end, that would form a thread that would go around the earth twice. Huge. Insane. Okay, it is insane. Now, every single cell in our body, every organ relies on just the right amount of blood flow, so they're getting fed with oxygen and nutrients. They don't need more than just the right amount, but if they don't have enough, our body has to be able to grow more. Okay, this having just the right amount, I call it the Goldilocks zone. So Goldilocks, remember the story? The bears went in there, and it's not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft. Or our health defenses, including angiogenesis, is exactly the same way. Not too much and not too little, but just the right amount. So this just right zone exists for our blood vessels, our stem cells, our microbiome, our DNA kind of balance, as well as our immune system. It's all about homeostasis, a term you used earlier, just the right amount. Now, that means our body knows how to grow more when it's necessary. And then when there's enough, it stops. And if there's too much, it's kind of like a gardener, that sees your lawn overgrowing, it mows the lawn, just mows it right back down until it gets to the right height. Okay. Our body's health defenses, when they're working at their best, there's like a perfectly manicured lawn. Not too much, not too little, just the right amount to be able to go around, like playing like rounds of golf on a perfect course. Now, what tumors do is they hijack this process. And so like a tumor is sitting on a golf course and just grows extra weeds and grass right just for itself. So that's what gets targeted. Your body tries to fight that off, but sometimes we need some extra help for it. That extra help can be a smart bomb drug that we design to target those extra blood vessels, or we can help our body mow the lawn by eating foods that have anti-angiogenic or blood vessel mowing capacity. You'll never be able to get rid of them all. It's just back down to the body's set point. So what's an example of a drug that can actually do this? There's monoclonal antibodies that are designed like smart bombs to take out tumor blood vessels. But foods can actually do it too. Now, why can drugs and foods target a tumor blood vessel and not take down your aorta or the blood vessels feeding your brain, like your carotid artery? It's because when we build healthy blood vessels, our body takes great care to construct them to be very, very strong. It's like building a skyscraper, okay? The architects and the contractors and their craftsmen, they make everything perfect as they can. But when a tumor does it, it's not a careful contractor. It's like a lousy contractor, just throws the thing up. And so the blood vessels that are grown are flimsy, they're fragile, they're unstable. And so think about, a hurricane, like Hurricane Ida, sweeps through the area, and the strong, sturdy structures, our healthy blood vessels, are going to stay up even when the wind is there. All the ones that are not well constructed, the wind blows them right down. And that's why a tumor blood vessel is much more vulnerable to either food or drug.
Wow, that's really incredible. Okay, so you wrote the book, Eat to Beat Disease. We've touched on a little bit, but now I think it's worth, what is your sort of general, I know that there's never going to be a one size fits all. It's very important for people to understand, but in terms of general patterns of eating to beat disease, what are those general patterns?
Yeah, well, first of all, when I wrote Eat to Beat Disease, which became a New York Times bestseller, the whole point was not about writing about a diet. It's not keto, it's not South Beach, it's not about weight loss even. It's really about health. And because when I was doing my research to look at different foods that would activate our health defenses, here's the first thing I was surprised by. It's not like one food or two foods or five foods, it was more than 200 different kinds of foods. And they were fruits, and they were vegetables, and they were spices, and they were legumes, and they were different kinds of seafood, including shellfish, and they were different kinds of fish beyond salmon. Okay, and there's even some dairy products that can actually have some benefits as well, including fermented foods like yogurt and sauerkraut and kimchi. And these foods are so ubiquitous that they are found in the traditional cultures of every single society, but especially Mediterranean diet, which we know is healthier for us as a pattern, and Asian food, which we also know is healthier. And so what I started to realize is that eating to beat disease is not just picking a particular disease and trying to figure out what the recipe is, that the one size fits all, but it's really a journey that we have our whole lives, from the time we're small until we get old. We get older, parents have the opportunity to actually start feeding their children as soon as they're taking solid foods that can actually help them beat disease. In fact, breastfeeding is actually helping your child beat disease by shaping and sculpting their microbiome, right? One of the health defense systems. So I came up with 200 different foods. I laid them all out according to which health defense systems they activate. Some cases they activate all of the health defense systems. I call those grand slammers because, man, a single food will knock the 5 health defense systems out of the park. It's a home run to eat those things. And I explain all the research that's been done by myself and other people to show how they actually work. So what's the principle? To eat to beat disease, you can love your food to love your health. Love your food to love your health. That seems so contradictory to what we used to think about healthy food, right? Because the old thinking is that, well, you got to eat healthy, you got to cut out everything you love, And I'm turning that upside down and inside out. I'm inverting the whole equation. I'm saying, if you look at those 200 foods that I put down in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, take a Sharpie out and circle the ones that you love already. I like this, I like that one, tomatoes I like, oh man, I like this one. Okay, that's a great starting point, because if you start eating those foods, you're already ahead of the game, because you already love foods that can actually that can activate your health defenses. Now you can expand your horizons by choosing these other foods that are out there as well. If you sat on TV and watched the Food Network, you can find all these people experimenting with different ingredients. If you go onto YouTube, you can look for an ingredient you don't recognize, bitter melon. The heck is a bitter melon? Well, it's an Asian gourd. Is it bitter? Absolutely. But there are ways of actually cooking it so that it's not so bitter and it has medicinal value. Well, how would I do it? click on YouTube and search on recipe, cooking, bitter melon, and you'll watch somebody teach it to you. So love your food to love your health, explore with your life, and just know that the foods I put in the book activate your body's health defenses.
Right. And some of the things I know you've recommended historically, mostly plant-based. You talk about getting some omega-3 from marine sources, whether it's from fish or whether it's from, I think you talk about seaweed. You'd have to refresh my memory. You do personally eat some meat, though I don't know if you eat any red meat or not. I know you recommend that people cut that down, extra virgin olive oil, things like that. Am I missing any of the heavy hitting advice?
Well, I mean, so here's the basic thing. All the research, scientific research has been done, and the epidemiological, the public health research shows that eating a mostly plant-based diet, that's pretty broad. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, healthy oils, good for you. You should eat mostly that. Doesn't mean, and by the way, plant-based could be tricky because a lot of ultra-processed foods also have plant materials in it. Processed soy, all kinds of other things, all kinds of unhealthy oils made from plants. However, if it's whole plant-based foods, it's kind of stuff you'd find in a grocery store or a farmer's market. Okay, like I would say, mostly go for those. Okay. Seafood has been shown to improve survival and decrease the risk of death. If you eat 2 or 3 servings of seafood, it could be fish or shellfish, you get healthy omega-3 fatty acids.
Is that per day?
Per week, 2 to 3 servings per week. And the amount you would eat, which I write a whole chapter about food doses, the amount you would eat is about 3 ounces. So people like, well, wait, I'm not a human scale. I have no idea what 3 ounces is. What I would say, it's a lot less than you think. It is a piece of fish about the size of a deck of playing cards. You can put it in your palm, and it's about as thick as a deck of playing cards. Not that big a deal. And and people who love seafood can get a lot of it that way. Recently, there was an interesting study that showed if you actually increase your level of omega-3s by an extra serving a week or 2, like from wherever you are with your starting point, you can increase your longevity, your survival by 4.7 years. So an extra serving of omega-3 rich seafood, you increase your lifetime survival by 4.7 years. Now you can get, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you can get omega-3s from plant-based foods. So chia seeds, flax seeds, some of the nuts, you can get those as well. But what in plant-based foods, you get a different kind of substrate to make your omega-3s. So you got to eat a lot more of it. So, I like diversity. So whole plant-based foods, seafoods, if you actually eat fish, if you don't, explore it, if it's not for some ethical reason. And then, look, and dairy, by the way, when it comes to food and health, there's no universals. Okay. Some dairy products, honestly, cheeses are good for the microbiome because many traditionally made cheeses, not in large quantities, they've got saturated fats and a lot of salt. But some cheeses actually have lactobacillus and other healthy gut bacteria that we can use as a probiotic food. Yogurt, a dairy product, probiotic food. And so I'm all about the science. Wherever the science takes me is where the evidence takes me. There was a great American novelist named E.L. Doctorow, and he had this great quote. He once said, writing, he's a novelist, writing is like driving at night. You can't see beyond your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. And that's what science is like. You just can only see where your headlights are going, and you're focusing on the evidence and ignoring all the darkness that's actually out there. So what about meat? Okay. I can tell you that most of the research has been pretty convincing that if you eat a lot of red meat, okay, which was really only done for the last 70 years or so, since the 1950s. Before that, most societies were not prosperous enough to have a ton of meat around. Okay. And now we have an abundance of meat, and we've industrialized meat and all the things that are not so good for us. But all the studies show that eating a lot of red meat, and all the studies have shown that eating processed meats, we're talking about our sausages and the pepperonis and all kinds of other hot dogs, all that kind of stuff. That's been classified by the World Health Organization as a carcinogen, by the way, processed meats. Once in a while, especially if that's something you really enjoy, don't worry about it. Knock yourself out, enjoy it, but do not do it all the time. And if you can cut it down or cut it out, more power to you, better for you. And so this whole idea about, life is for the living, got to enjoy how we do things. Some things we enjoy aren't that good for us. Some people like to roll down the windows or take the top down and drive really fast on a road, faster than the speed limit. Just don't do it all the time, because one of these times you're going to actually get into an accident, right? And so I think that idea of moderation, but if you're informed by science and you can actually then listen to your body, if you feel like crap after eating something, don't go for it. Don't eat it the next time, or eat less of it. The science is just so rich at this point in time in history that, anybody that wants to get into food as medicine, as a science, not as a trend, but as a real science, has a huge future ahead of them. Our body is actually hardwired with all the processes we need to maintain our health from the day we're born until our very last breath. And what foods do is not something magical. Foods that we consume activate our body's own hardwired health defenses. And that's actually why we don't get sick more often.
I love that. And I think there's something quite unique about your approach when it comes to food and medicine. I want to get into some specific foods later on in this conversation, but just to sort of tease people, as it were, right at the start, are there a couple of kind of facts about some specific foods that you think would be surprising for people that a lot of people may not be aware of?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a lot of mythology about foods, and some of it's wrong. And when I say myth, I'm referring to urban legends. So as a bit of a teaser, most women have heard that soy should be avoided because it's dangerous. So eating soy can increase your risk for breast cancer. That is a common thought, but it's completely false. It is an urban legend. Research actually shows that those women who are at highest risk, including women who have breast cancer, the more soy they eat, the lower their chances of death. And so that's an example of an eye-opening fact that science brings to the table about soy. Here's another one. Many people have heard that tomatoes should be avoided because they're a member of the nightshade family, which is poisonous, and that tomatoes contain a deadly toxin called lectins that should be avoided, and it causes inflammation in the body. Well, that's also completely wrong. There are thousands of lectins out there. Tomatoes happen to have some of the non-toxic ones. And in fact, the studies of tomatoes have actually shown in more than 30,000 people that those men who eat just 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes a week have a 30% lower risk of developing prostate cancer. And so again, 2 examples of common foods that are surrounded by urban modern mythology that science cuts through like a hot knife through butter in order to reveal what the true health benefits could be.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, later on in this conversation, I'd love to get into some more specifics around particular foods. But I think at the start here, just to sort of set the scene, one of the things that really struck me about your approach is, how you look at health and disease. So many of us, I'm a medical doctor. I trained in the 90s in Edinburgh Medical School. We're trained how to diagnose disease and then treat it. And sometimes we talk about preventing disease in the future. But you sort of reframed that slightly, didn't you, to sort of ask yourself, well, why is it that we're not getting sick more often? And I think that's a really beautiful, it's a subtle distinction, but it's such a beautiful way of looking at the human body. So can you tell me a little bit about, why did you frame it that way? And by doing so, what answers did you get that can help us all with our health and well-being?
Yeah, so like yourself, during my education and training in medicine, we're all responsible for digesting about 4,000 years of Western medical knowledge in a few years. And then to be able to, in short order, turn that around into everyday practice for our patients, right? So that's a tall order just to begin with. And most of it is about learning how to
detect, diagnose diseases accurately, as accurately as possible, and then coming up with essentially a textbook solution. I mean, that's what we're taught to do from the very beginning. Recognize the disease, recognize the solution, try to match them up, and then actually deliver that as something that we can use to help our patients. And I did that for many, many years. And in fact, I was so inspired by the unmet needs for treating diseases, some diseases successfully, like cancer, like diabetes, like blindness, frankly. I wound up actually starting a nonprofit organization called the Angiogenesis Foundation. It's a charity where we, as a third party, set out to develop better treatments for all of these, kind of unbeatable diseases, looking for their disease common denominator. And I'm going to come back to common denominator in a second. I felt that although, billions of dollars have been spent towards cancer research or research to prevent blindness, as just two different examples, or breast cancer or Alzheimer's disease, progress in science was formidable, but progress in treatment was way too slow. And my thought was that if we could actually look at what makes diseases common and similar to one another, rather than appreciate only what makes them different from one another. So as a researcher, we tend to take a field of study, an inch wide, and then dive a mile deep into exploring it. What I wanted to do was to really upend that idea to say, well, maybe what we should do is take a look at many diseases and see what the common threads are. Because if we could find that common thread, we might be able to pull the bow back and send a single arrow more efficiently through multiple diseases to have an economy of scale of impact. Okay, so when I did that, we wound up becoming enormously successful. I've been involved with 41, about to be 42 FDA-approved treatments for cancer, complications of diabetes, and vision loss. And with that kind of success, one of the things that it made me realize was the power of science to generate evidence that something works. And the other thing that I realized is that treating disease was highly valuable, but really misses the mark of preventing the disease in the first place. Because if all we do as a sort of in our medical world is invent new things to throw at old diseases in this never-ending progression, then we're chasing really the tail of a beast that we'll never catch. And I wanted to be able to actually figure out how to, prevent the problem in the first place. Now, a short story about what actually happened that sparked me towards nutrition is I was a doctor for many years in a veterans hospital. This is a hospital in the U.S. that takes care of people who are former soldiers. And, as a payback for their service, they can come to a medical center and receive essentially free care. And I felt compelled, a duty, actually, when I finished my training, to be able to pay back the people who helped to support and defend the country. And so I took on a stint at a veterans hospital. These were some of my favorite patients. They were grateful. They had rich lives. They had amazing stories to tell, and they were just nice people. And unfortunately, though, they were pretty sick. So most of the people that I saw were in their 60s and 70s and 80s, were terribly obese. They had diabetes, heart disease, cancer, respiratory illnesses, you name it. They had these terrible problems. And the thing that struck me, that, because here I was writing prescriptions and sending people to specialists and having them have surgery and all these other interventions. And I was very excited, actually, at the very beginning, to be able to let them know some of the treatments that I myself had been involved with helping to develop. But what I realized that was the irony is that these soldiers who were so terribly out of shape in the latter part of their lives were once cut, fit, buff physical specimens that couldn't have even served in the military unless they were in perfect shape. And so I had to ask myself, what the hell happened to these people?
Yeah.
They were in great shape and now they're in terrible shape. And that's what led me on sort of this odyssey to think back about what what kept them from being sick in the early days, and then what actually happened to their bodies that led them to deteriorate. And that's where I came back to this the health defenses that are hardwired in our body. Because like soldiers that they were, they once were the defenders of the country, but as they got older, their ability to defend actually waned. And so too in our body, I realized there's these biological systems that keep us fit, keep us healthy. And if we're not careful to take good care of them, they too will wane in their power to defend us. And that's actually how we wind up getting sick.
Yeah, it's very powerful what you just shared about the Veterans Hospital, because I think, although that's in the latter stages of their life, I'm sure there's many people listening to this right now or watching this who would have resonated with that on some level and thought, hey, you know what, when I was at school, I used to swim, or, maybe I was on the college or the university squash team or the tennis team. And now in my middle age, I've got a bit of extra weight. I don't have as much energy. So, it's on a continuum, isn't it? And of course, the end of that continuum, that's where we tend to get involved as medical doctors, Western medical doctors at least. And we say, oh, you have this disease now. But actually, I think that's a very powerful way of just showing gradually, without us realizing, as we're getting on with our daily lives, our health can be deteriorating bit by bit. In terms of these defense systems, you also mentioned at the start of this conversation the word resilience, and how what you try and do, or certainly food, when used as medicine, can really help us with that resilience. Perhaps could you take us through these defense systems that you've learned about? Because I know you've identified 5 of them. I think it would be really interesting for my audience what those are. And then I think we'll get to, well, what can we actually do about each and every single one?
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about resilience first before I talk about the health defenses. So think about how resilient the human body is, right? I mean, we can take a punch and we can get back up on our feet pretty easily throughout most of our lives. Our body knows how to heal. So if you wind up getting a cold, you tend to recover from it. If you get a cut on your skin, it tends to heal up. If our belly gets upset and we wind up, feeling we're in a toilet in ways that are not comfortable for us, we'll generally rebound back to our normal health. I mean, that's really most of the experiences that we have as we're younger. And that resilience actually is quite an amazing thing, because it has to do with this concept that we learn as doctors, which is homeostasis. Our body wants to stay in a homeostatic position. And that means like a gyroscope, or like a big ocean liner, sailing through, rough seas. There is kind of a set point that no matter how big the waves are, we tend to kind of stay set. Our center of gravity is where everything wants to get back to. And that is actually critical health. Now, what's the gyroscopes of our health? How do we actually maintain our balance? How do we veer off to the side, but rebound back to that center point, our own center of gravity? And that's where these health defenses actually come into play. So our health defenses, which I'm going to tell you the 5 of them in a moment, actually started to be developed in our bodies when we were still in our mom's womb. So when our mom's egg met our dad's sperm and fertilized in the womb, within about 4 or 5 days, these cells, primitive cells and stem cells, wound up forming our organs, our circulation, our hearts, our brains, our noses, our hands, our feet, our bones. And along the way, at the same time, our body formed these remarkable defenses. Now, these defenses are designed to protect our bodies the same way that in a European fortress, a medieval fortress, there are these defenses, right?
Yeah.
You have the moat. You actually have the drawbridge. You have those arrow slits that you can shoot out of. You've got the curved wall. All these defenses that you find in a castle, there is a counterpart in our body. And in our body, our defenses to keep us healthy and resist disease and help us maintain resilience are the following. Number 1, we have a defense called angiogenesis. Angiogenesis, 2 words. It's actually 1 word, but it's 2 component parts of it. Angio meaning blood or blood vessels, genesis meaning growth. So it's how our body grows blood vessels, our circulation. And the reason blood vessels are a defense system is because we've got 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed into the average adult body.
Wow.
And these are the highways and byways that deliver blood, oxygen that we breathe, and the nutrients from the food we eat to every single cell and organ. And if we don't have enough of these blood vessels, our tissues, our organs starve. and many times they'll die. So our body needs to be able to maintain enough blood vessels, enough circulation. And on the other hand, if we've got too many blood vessels and overgrowth, that would be like a garden that overgrows with weeds. Those weeds actually obscure the function of the garden, and they can actually destroy our health by feeding diseases. Extra blood vessels can feed diseases like cancer, as an example, or arthritis or psoriasis, or many other types of harmful unwanted blood vessels. And so the body maintains its resilience in circulation by literally maintaining a balance, this set point, this gyroscope, center of gravity. And the way that I tell people, it's kind of like the old fairy tale Goldilocks. So not too many blood vessels, not too few blood vessels, but just right, like the three bears.
Yeah.
Not too hard, not too soft, not too hot, not too cold, just right. This is a paradigm that follows all the health defense systems. So blood vessels are one of them. Secondly are our stem cells. Remember I said that we formed in a womb with stem cells?
Yeah.
Well, when we're born, we have extra stem cells left over that were not used. So it's kind of like painting a room. If you're painting a room and you're going to buy paint, right? You always buy extra paint, because the last thing you want to do is to run out of paint before you finish the job. What do you do when the room has been completed from painting? You've got extra cans of paint. So what do? You put the cap on, you put it in your garage, okay, for another time if you need to spot check. Well, this is actually what happens with our stem cells. When we're born, and our organs have formed all these stem cells, the overage, and we've got extra stem cells. In fact, we've got 750 million extra stem cells when we're born. That gets packed up into our bone marrow, where it basically sits for most of our lives until we need to repair our organs from the inside out. So regeneration, our ability to be able to renew ourselves, is another health defense system. A third one is our gut. Our gut microbiome. So much has been made of how important our gut bacteria is. I will tell you, we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg of understanding our gut bacteria, but I will tell you it is so important that we've got about roughly the same number of bacteria growing inside our body as we actually have human cells.
Yeah.
And beyond bacteria, there's even viruses that are healthy viruses. I just learned this the other day. We've got about 39 trillion bacteria growing inside our body. Most of them are healthy. And as you know, when we were in medical school, we were all taught, we drank the Kool-Aid that bacteria are bad. And so one must destroy bacteria. And hence there are antibiotics to match with bacteria. But in fact, most bacteria in our bodies are good. And occasionally there is a bad actor that kind of springs out. And so but what I learned was that there are good viruses as well. In fact, there are 10 times more viruses in and on the body than bacteria. So there's 380 trillion viruses, the human virome. Our DNA is hardwired as a fourth health defense system, hardwired to protect itself against damage from the environment, like ultraviolet radiation, radon from the ground, any chemicals or solvents we might inhale, oxidative stress, even emotional stress, which can actually fray our DNA, our genetic code. Our DNA can protect that. And of course, finally, our immune system, which like the volume switch in a car radio, is perfectly tuned to be able to deliver a little inflammation where it's needed, a lot of immune protection to be able to ward off invaders from the outside like bacteria and viruses, and invaders from the inside like cancer. And that whole system, like a volume switch on a radio, needs to be able to turn up. And when you've had enough, to turn it back down and back down to that homeostatic balancing point, that set point. And for all these health defense systems, our body kind of chugs along through life, keeping us right sort of steady as she goes. Every now and then it's got to rear up and swashbuckle to get rid of some disease, but it comes right back to center. And that's what foods can actually help to support.
Hi there. If you enjoyed watching this video, I know you'll love the next one. Stay here and check it out, and I'll see you there.